Welcome everyone to our Ask the Doctor webinar today. My name is Shelley Kurian with SkyPass Foundation, and we are here to discuss strategies to slow down the course of Parkinson's with a very special guest, Dr. Bastiaan Bloem, who is joining us all the way from the Netherlands. Professor Bas Bloem is a consultant neurologist at the Department of Neurology, Radboud University Medical Center in the Netherlands. After obtaining his medical degree and his PhD, he trained as a neurologist and a movement disorder specialist. And in September 2008, he was appointed professor of neurology with movement disorders as his special area of interest. Professor Bloem is on the editorial board for several national and international journals and has published over 800 publications, including more than 675 peer-reviewed international papers. He has also supervised 51 successfully completed PhD dissertations. This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Dr. Bloem's body of work. He has a wealth of knowledge and expertise and is going to be interviewed today by our very own Dr. Shilpa Chitnis. Dr. Chitnis, for those of you who don't know, is a professor of neurology and a movement disorder specialist at UT Southwestern, and she also serves on the board of directors here at SkyPass Foundation. If you're joining us live, just a reminder that you can ask your questions and comments throughout the conversation using the QA box or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And if you submitted questions with registration, we do have those, and we'll try to address as many of those as we can within the time that we have together. Shilpa, over to you for the interview.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley, and thank you, Bas, Dr. Bloem, for taking the time. I know you're a busy person and always in demand for your knowledge and expertise. So, I went through the long list of papers that you have and picked some choices, questions that would be good for you to answer. So let's start out. We're unfortunately getting close to completing 2 years of the pandemic, and hopefully, with some end in sight. But let's talk about potentially grave consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic for people living with Parkinson's. The things that you can think about impact basically of the stress on PD.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So I think what we've seen is a number of things happening during the crisis, and we may see some of it in the aftermath. Is first, people have been grounded at home and they've been able to exercise less. We know exercise works like a drug. It suppresses symptoms, and we think that maybe exercise could be the first intervention that slows down the progression of Parkinson's. So now, because of their physical inactivity, we may see a long-term worsening of Parkinson's. That's one. The second thing is people have experienced stress. I know that for me, it's been 2 stressful years. Stress is bad for anyone, but now if you have Parkinson's, stress worsens your symptoms acutely. As people will know, the phone rings and your tremor increases. You're seeing a doctor, your tremor increases. But we have increasing suspicion, this is a suspicion, not evidence, that chronic stress may also lead to a hastening of disease progression, which emphasizes to me the importance of mindfulness or yoga or anything else, speaking to a friend, speaking to your children or your family to alleviate stress. That's number 2. And number 3 is that there are recent data now that the so-called long COVID syndrome, which we know exists in the population at large, is also happening in people with Parkinson's. It manifests itself in a generic way, like fogging of the brain, but also with a worsening of motor symptoms. So as most folks will know, if you have a bladder infection or the flu, your Parkinson's will worsen. I always say your Parkinson's is like a thermometer, an indicator of something bad happening. But if the flu recovers, if your bladder infection is treated, you will recover to your previous level. Long COVID is different. We're seeing long-term sequelae of the COVID infections. So those are at least 3 concerns in the long term, Shilpa.
Yes, thank you so much. Let me ask you this. I recently reviewed a paper in the journal about Parkinsonism developing as a consequence of COVID-19. And so what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, there's at least, we should separate that into 2 groups. So we're seeing quite a number of patients who come to us and say, I developed Parkinson's shortly after a COVID infection. Some of that made me spurious. And by that I mean that if you speak carefully to these people, it turns out that they already had a REM sleep behavior disorder, acting out your dreams, constipation, a depression, one or more of what we call the so-called prodromal symptoms. So I think many of these people already had Parkinson's, which is about to happen, and where the stress of the COVID unmasked what was about to happen anyway. And I think many patients, and we're seeing this a lot in clinic, is patients will come to me and say, well, my spouse passed away, or something terrible happened in the family, and then my Parkinson's started. And people think that the stress was the cause of the Parkinson's. And I can reassure people that's not the case. Probably that stress consumed the last bit of dopamine, which brought to light a Parkinson's that was about to happen anyway. And I'm always telling these people as a reassurance, losing a beloved one is bad enough as it is. To think that it caused your Parkinson's may make things even worse. But there are 5, 6 cases described in the world quite carefully who had none of those prodromal features, who had COVID and with a lucid interval developed Parkinson's, which looked like real Parkinson's, who had abnormal dopamine scans, and they interviewed these people time and time again, no prodromal symptoms. We know that the virus enters the brain, it can cause direct damage itself. Another mechanism could be via little strokes. And a third mechanism is through an immunological system, whereby the body tries to eradicate the virus by sending off little cruise missiles, which may co-react with the brain. And we fear that through either one of those 3 mechanisms, the virus may ultimately damage the same system that's involved in Parkinson's, and thereby lead to what we see as Parkinson's disease. Maybe folks have seen the film Awakenings. And this was the aftermath of the Spanish flu. The flu virus changes its structure every year, which is why we get the flu each year. You don't become immune for life. But once every 50 to 100 years, the flu virus changes more dramatically, causing a terrible infection. This happened in World War I, and survivors of the bad flu went into coma, survived, had a severe Parkinsonian state, which is described in the film Awakening. So we know that viruses can cause Parkinsonism. So whether this is just a few, the tip of the iceberg, or whether we're seeing on the brink of seeing a new wave of Parkinson's, we don't know. But it's definitely something we need to keep an eye open for.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bloem. I think that was a great explanation of all the possible mechanisms. So you talked a little bit about this, but maybe you can elaborate more. So this crisis calls really for rapid introduction of better self-management strategies that can help patients to better deal with the challenges, of social distancing and other consequences. So what can you tell us about self-management strategies?
So, what I think is really crucial is when you develop Parkinson's disease, I think uncertainty is a key word for many people. They don't know what to do. And obviously finding professional support, a neurologist, a Parkinson nurse, is obviously critical and helpful. But the more you can do yourself, the better it is. And I think there are at least 3 components to this. The first one is knowledge. And I think this is what we're doing today, Shilpa, is making people more knowledgeable. The better informed you are as a patient, as a spouse, as a family, as a friend, the better, I think, well-informed patients are happier, healthier, and able to participate in self-management. So we need to educate patients and families as much as we can. This is why I'm donating my time today to people in Canada and elsewhere to help. The second part is exercise. This is something very close to my heart. I used to be a professional athlete myself, a volleyball player. I'm sitting down now, but I'm 6'8", believe it or not. And exercise works like a drug. It helps to suppress the symptoms. It's good for non-motor symptoms like sleep, constipation. It's better for your bone health. And we have really cool, exciting data from my own center to suggest that exercise may help to slow down the progression of Parkinson's. The third one is a diet. And the other thing that I always tell every patient is make sure that your bowel movements are regular. And a high fiber diet and drinking enough water is something every patient should do, because if your bowel movements are slow, the pills are bound not to work as well, or sometimes not at all. So make sure you have regular bowel movements through a healthy diet, rich in fibers, rich in fluid. There's some careful evidence to suggest that a Mediterranean diet, the way the Greeks eat, with olives and olive oil and fruits and vegetables and fish, but not meat and not a lot of carbs, reduces the risk of developing Parkinson's disease. Whether the same diet is good when you have Parkinson's is unknown, but I recommend it to all my patients. And finally, a few cups of coffee seem to reduce the risk of developing Parkinson's. Again, whether it's helpful when you have the disease, we don't know, but it's a simple thing that you can try. And finally, Shilpa, if I may, I suddenly feel like a knight on a horse trying to fight the association between pesticides and Parkinson's.
Yes.
We know that pesticides can contribute to causing Parkinson's. Research in the Netherlands has shown that these pesticides not only cause the disease in farmers, they cause the disease in people living in the vicinity of farms, but they also cause Parkinson's in all of us because it reaches the food chain. So the fourth dietary advice that I give is wash your veggies, wash the fruit, even with a little bit of soap. Believe it or not, it helps to get rid of the pesticides. And if you can afford it, eat biological stuff.
That's really good advice. You know, I basically spent a lot of years in southern Louisiana, and you know, they basically fish a lot, and because there's so much weeds in the rivers and the lakes, they use rotenone, right, rat
Yes.
poison, to basically kill the weeds. And then, you know, there is so much Parkinsonism because of rotenone, more than likely. And I know you and Ray Dorsey and Michael can really have this big movement about, you know, eradicating Parkinson's, especially with, you know, with pesticides. What kind of efforts are you putting in that direction?
Well, a number of things. So I think there are certain pesticides which we know are very, very likely to be associated with Parkinson's. And paraquat, for example,
yes,
is very suspicious, very suspicious. It's one of the most toxic compounds on the planet. It's been banned in Europe, it's been banned in China, but lo and behold, people are still using it in the United States, which is unbelievable, unbelievable. So there is a push towards politicians and policymakers to ban any pesticide that is already known to be suspicious. Chlorpyrifos has just been banned from the United States by the Biden administration, which is good news. But for example, Roundup, the weed killer, which is widely used, is also a suspicious compound. The problem is there are compounds where we know it's likely to be toxic, but for many others, we don't know for sure because they are tested in rodents, and they basically give it to a rodent, a mouse, and they say, does it kill the rodent? No. Does it cause cancer? No. Can the mouse still walk around? Yes. And then it's admitted. But as people probably know, you get Parkinson's if you lose 80% of your dopaminergic neurons. So if this compound kills off 70% of the dopaminergic neurons, the mouse will look sound and happy, but it's actually damaged by the compound. So the other action that I'm taking is telling governments, administrations, regulatory bodies that the screening procedures should change ASAP. And then the other concern is you're not just exposed to rotenone, you're not just exposed to paraquat, you're exposed to cocktails. And very interesting research recently from California shows that typically 4 or 5 pesticides are used in conjunction on the farms. And these mixtures are more toxic than each compound alone. So I'm worried. So protect yourself if you work with these substances, wash your food, eat biological, and become an activist. Our book, Ending Parkinson's Disease, explicitly says, become an activist, raise your voice, tell your local politicians or national politicians, this policy should change.
That's a fantastic effort, and I hope it grows more as we learn more. What can you tell us about the use of music therapy for Parkinson's?
Yeah. By the way, I'm seeing some interesting questions in the chat, also related to the pesticide discussion. Not sure if you want to take them now or take them in the end.
Oh, we can take them now. Let's see.
So Peter Balina says, I sold herbicides for years. I have PD. No one in my family or my twin brother has it. So Peter, that is an interesting remark. The problem is, there isn't one cause for Parkinson's disease. Pesticides is one. Trichloroethylene, a solvent, is another one. Air pollution is another one. What you eat, your diet, is another one. And brain concussions contribute. All of that in interaction with your genetic materials. So if you have a monogenic twin brother, which you didn't specify, then he will carry the same genetic material. But if it was a bizygotic twin, then of course he has different genes, and the genes interact with the toxins in the environment. So it's like a soil and grain. You need both for it to grow, and it's in the interaction. That's why sometimes you can have it, but your brother doesn't, because of all these complex matters.
It's wonderful. I think that was the only question in there. I was trying to go through the questions as well.
Sure.
Okay, so coming back to music therapy for Parkinson's.
Yeah. I'm a strong believer. So one of my great passions is increasingly to use art as a therapy. And I think music has a number of ingredients that make it a highly attractive intervention. Music and dance. First, the reasons people with Parkinson's have difficulty moving is because the rhythm generator in the brain is damaged. Music typically has a rhythm, and external rhythms can help to restore normal movements because the brain does respond to the external stimuli if the stimuli cannot be generated internally. So that's one. The second thing is music, if you love it, pushes more dopamine from the amygdala, your happiness nucleus in the brain, and that same dopamine will spill over to your motor system and allow you to move better. So this is the happy emotions. Third, dancing is typically done in conjunction with others. So there is the social element. And if you dance closely with a spouse, it's also safe in terms of falling and balance. So I think dancing and music has all the right ingredients, and I'm a great fan. And increasingly, it is now supported by research to show that there are benefits.
Absolutely, and there's quite a big group of Dance with Parkinson's here in the DFW Metroplex. Wonderful. So just coming back to exercise, what can you tell us about? There are PD boxing programs here as well, and what do you think about its impact on patients?
Yes, again, I just like dance, I'm a great fan of boxing. Boxing also ticks a number of boxes, if you will, funny wording, but it ticks a number of boxes that makes it attractive as an intervention for people with Parkinson's. Boxing is multitasking. You need to maintain your balance while making the punch. And multitasking is something that is difficult for people with Parkinson's because that is a function of the brain that's now damaged. Use it or lose it, you now practice something that has been damaged. And we know that even at a high age, our brain is plastic and it can respond to training. So you're training some of your weaknesses. Boxing is typically a social event. And for those folks who are not boxing, people are not hitting the head. You may remember Muhammad Ali, who may or may not have attracted Parkinson's because of the many punches on the head, but they're typically punching a boxing bag or a hand, but there's never contact with the brain. And I feel, but this is sort of psychology, that you can also hit your frustration away by aiming at the punching bag. So again, boxing fulfilling a lot of requirements and also supported now by increasing evidence.
Yes, absolutely. So what can you tell us about your multidisciplinary care model for PD?
What we've done in the Netherlands is we've built a nationwide network of, in particular, allied health professionals, so physiotherapists, dietitians, occupational therapists, speech language therapists, nurses, and on and on and on, where we said, instead of letting everybody do a little bit of Parkinson's, we train a small dedicated army of highly motivated professionals who receive a very thorough 3-day training course to bring them to a higher level. But that's not enough. We then funnel the patients through selective referral to those experts. So they start to treat more and more patients. And that high caseload allows you to apply your freshly acquired knowledge in daily practice. We also promote collaboration between these different disciplines so they work together effectively as a team. And we deeply invest in patient education. And that combination, professional empowerment, patient empowerment, and teamwork in the Netherlands leads to fewer hip fractures. It leads to fewer hospital admissions, happier patients, happier professionals, interestingly enough, because if you're a physiotherapist, Parkinson's can be a scary disease. If you are a dedicated expert in Parkinson's, Parkinson's can be, and forgive the word, a gratifying disease to treat, because it is a very treatable disease if you know your stuff. And trust me, doctors, physios, etc., are frustrated because you can't find your buddy who works with you in a multidisciplinary team. It's difficult to reach them on the phone, and now ParkinsonNet means you can effectively work together as a team. So the professionals are happier, and the costs have gone down by 30 million euros for Parkinson's care alone in the Netherlands because of prevented hip fractures, prevented admissions, and greater efficiency of care. That's 5% of our annual expenditure. Now imagine if you could do that across the States or Canada or elsewhere and spend that 5% on research or on better nursing homes or more nurses or better doctors. Boy. And we're happy to share our knowledge, by the way.
Yes, the PDNet's been a really, inspiring thing for people to want to do. I hope one of these days we can replicate that in Dallas. And then I'm going to nominate you for the Nobel Prize for having done that and for eradicating Parkinson's. Okay.
There is an interesting question, Shilpa. Peter Balinas, who also had the other interesting question. And by the way, I hope you were happy with my previous answer, Peter. Your other question is also well taken. He asks me, what is the ratio of trained professionals to patients? That's an excellent, excellent question. What we said, Peter, is we want to train a small group, because if you train too many people, then just like homeopathy, you start to dilute. So what we said is the minimum number of patients per therapist is 7, which is an arbitrary figure, but we said 7. In the Netherlands, it is now so effective that each therapist is now treating 20 to 30 patients each year, which is wonderful. Prior to ParkinsonNet, it was 0 to 1. And that has made a dramatic change. So it's a bit of arbitrary because the fewer people you train, the longer people have to travel, right? So the more loosely populated your network, the further people have to travel. But, and we may come to this, Shilpa, thanks to telemedicine, and particularly in loosely populated areas of the world, like many parts of the States or Canada, people have to travel long distances. So If you now have a network of experts and they can see you remotely, then Bob's your uncle, proper English.
Oh, goodness. Yes, absolutely. So I believe that, occupational therapy seems to be quite a bit underutilized in PD patients. Can you highlight the utility of occupational therapy in PD patients?
Yeah. And before answering, Peter says, is there literature on the Parkinson'S program? There's a whole bunch of literature,
Oh,
Peter.
yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'm happy to share, Shilpa and Shelley, some relevant papers, which can then be divided with all the folks on the line today. And I'll send some, but it's supported by a truck of literature published in the Lancet, in the British Medical Journal, in high quality journals. So this is not just a dream. This is an evidence-based, robust intervention. So occupational therapy is also a crucial part of the Dutch Parkinson'S. And I'm a strong believer in OTs. I'm a fan of occupational therapy. What OTs do is they don't cure your disease, but they teach folks how to better deal with the handicaps or disability that they have. So for example, writing becomes small, and by teaching patients to write purposely between lines that are separated largely apart, you can restore better writing. I mean, it's a silly example perhaps, but OTs can go into your home, look at full risks, and create a safer home environment. A crucial role for OTs is fatigue and to divide your energy better across the day. Tremor is another interesting one. By using a wristband that is heavy, you can reduce the amplitude of the tremor, and a good OT can work with you and see how to do it. Unbuttoning your clothes can be difficult, and they can work with adjusted clothes where you can just use a zipper or what's the word? The stuff that you can rip apart. They use it in airplanes to for seats. But anyway, so they can help you how to deal better with your issues. So I'm a great fan of occupational therapy. But Velcro, that's it, Lisa.
Velcro.
Thank you. Velcro. My English is good, but it's not perfect.
It's perfect. That's great. So in your patient population, what do you think are potential motivators and potential barriers for exercise for Parkinson's patients?
Yeah, we published quite extensively about this. There are many barriers, and I understand these. So first of all, we're all human beings. So forget Parkinson's. Everybody signs up for the gym on January 1st. It's busy. It's busy until January 14, and then it dries up. So everybody loves to exercise, but nobody keeps it up. Now, if you have Parkinson's, then there are extra issues. Your balance may be compromised. Walking is difficult. Some people have a depression, which is part of Parkinson's. Some people develop apathy, so lack of energy to undertake new things. So there are a number of extra reasons why it's particularly difficult for people with Parkinson's. But what I really do is always deeply invest in motivating people into the why of the exercise. And exercise is good for every citizen in the world to protect your bone health, protect against dementia, cardiovascular fitness. But it suppresses the decline of your symptoms. It alleviates motor symptoms. It improves your sleep. It maintains your bone health, which is crucial if you have a fall. And it makes new functional connections in the brain. Our latest data with functional MRI scans show that after exercise, in 70-year-old patients, the brain makes new connections between the diseased basal ganglia and the cortex. Now imagine you're sitting on your bicycle or you're running and you think, hecky darn, I'm not motivated today. Think of my blue eyes and think of your brain adapting positively to your exercise. If that doesn't motivate you to the bone, then I've done a bad job today, Shilpa.
No, I think you're doing an excellent job. And I hope more and more people can exercise. So you mentioned about falls. So can you comment on falls in patients with PD and some strategies to avoid falls, perhaps?
Yeah, so falls are difficult. Falls are common. But Parkinson's really is one of the leading falling diseases in the world. And it's difficult because it's a mixture of the poor balance, the walking problems, poor vision, sometimes drugs that people take to sleep better have a sedative effect, the blood pressure issues. And if you carefully look at it, there are 10, 12 causes for falls. And usually it isn't just one thing, but they work together. But at the same time, using a systematic approach, going over each and every risk factor and alleviating them one by one, you can really promote mobility and help to prevent at least some of the falls. You know, the best strategy to prevent falls is to stop moving, which is what some people do, you know, because of fear of falling, they just sit in their chair. But please, you know, that's the end of it. You have to keep moving, but you have to keep moving in a safe way. So the best thing is to review your medication. That's one. The most common cause of falls in Parkinson's is freezing of gait, where the feet are suddenly stuck to the floor. Most freezing will respond to levodopa, the Sinemet or the Medopar, although you need typically higher doses than what is needed to improve your hand function. So if your hand function is fine, but you still have freezing, it means you're underdosed. So speak to your neurologist about freezing of gait if you have that. That's one. Go to a physiotherapist who understands guidelines and Parkinson's disease. That's why you need a Parkinson-net, because cueing and all sorts of other compensatory strategies can improve your safety. If you have dizziness and fainting, speak to your GP or general medicine doctor and treat your orthostatic hypotension. Drinking a lot of fluid helps, although most people will also have urinary urge, so they stop drinking. But again, that's a bad idea. You need the fluid, so then the urinary urge also needs to be treated. And go over these and have your GP review any sedative medication. Sometimes a sleeping pill is easily prescribed, and then it just stays on your list of medication for donkey's years. But it will make your reactions slower. So critically review all your medication and get rid of stuff you don't really need.
Yeah, those are some really great strategies. What about freezing of gait? You know, that's been a whole kind of like the holy grail. Freezing of gait that's not levodopa responsive. Any thoughts on that, and anything that shows future promise?
So first of all, I think the majority of freezing is dopa responsive, but you need to dose high enough. So I think many people are undertreated when they have freezing of gait. So pushing the levodopa further is always a good idea. And of course, sometimes you're punished because of the dyskinesias, but it's worth a try to at least know whether the freezing is dopa responsive or not. And the only way to find out is to push the levodopa, not an agonist, push the levodopa. And that's crucial because if your freezing is dopa responsive, but you can't push your levodopa because of dyskinesias, then you're a good candidate for DBS.
Yes.
But if you didn't push the levodopa, the surgeon will say you have dopa-resistant freezing, which makes you ineligible for DBS. That's why you need to know whether your freezing is dopa responsive or not. And yes, there is a proportion of people where the freezing becomes truly dopa resistant, but I think it's a relatively small group. And then, of course, physiotherapy is critical. Sometimes amantadine can help. Sometimes methylphenidate can help. But it's crucial to know if your freezing is truly dopa resistant, it won't improve with DBS either. So that is not a solution. And in a very small group, levodopa causes the freezing.
Yes.
That's rare. It's called on-state freezing. We've published about this. Those people will know because they can walk better at night when they have to pee. They are better in the early morning before intake of medication. So if you find yourself freezing during the day, but you can walk at night and you can walk in the early morning, you might be one of those folks with the rare on-type freezing. Then, of course, you need to lower the dose or use other tricks. We've published about this.
Let me ask you, what do you think about spinal cord stimulation? Do you think there is any potential for it in freezing of gait?
Yes, let me take Lisa's question first.
Sure.
She says, can I ask you about gait dystonia on the right foot? This is causing walking / gait issues. So Lisa, dystonia of the foot is a common phenomenon. Dystonia is a common feature in Parkinson's patients. It is more common in people who attract the disease at a younger age. I'm not sure if you had a young age at onset, but it tends to be a bit more common in younger people. It can happen in older people as well, but and it's typically an off-period phenomenon. So so there you go. She's young onset, so that fits with you know, my general impression. Dystonia of the foot is typically an off-period phenomenon, which means you need to push dopaminergic medication in order to improve it. There's two additional solutions. One is botulinum toxin injections locally in the calf to treat it. So you need to talk to your neurologist about that. And sometimes a good physiotherapist with elastic tape can provide a tactile cue that can also alleviate some of the dystonia. So it's not strong enough to keep the foot from moving, but it acts like a tactile cue to restore normal foot position. So work with a physiotherapist, speak to your neurologist about more dopamine, and consider a botulinum toxin.
Yes, thank you.
So the spinal cord stimulation. Oh, yeah?
Yeah, go ahead.
The spinal cord stimulation. So that's fascinating. So what people found out is that if you electrically stimulate the spinal cord at the mid-thoracic level, somewhere between the shoulder blades, walking improved. There's studies from Canada and some other countries in the world to show this. I think it is encouraging. There's some rodent work to suggest this might work. There are so-called spinal pattern generators in your spinal cord. But the studies have not been well controlled because people could feel the tingling sensations of the spinal cord stimulation. And Parkinson's disease is a miraculous condition because it is very placebo responsive. So if people suspect they're receiving a real deal treatment, they will improve regardless. If I told patients, I'll just say this tongue in cheek, so forgive my English, but if I told patients, sit in horse until your nose, you know, all day long, and it will improve. It will improve your Parkinson's simply because Professor Bloem told you to do so, but it's the placebo response. So I'm not convinced that spinal cord stimulation is more than just a placebo stimulation, and we need more carefully controlled trials. That work is ongoing internationally, and I think we need to await the findings.
Yes, absolutely. What about droxidopa or acetylcholinesterase inhibitors for freezing of gait?
Yeah, so I'll separate the two. The acetylcholinesterase inhibitors have been shown in a number of studies to reduce freezing of gait. These are the drugs like Exelon that are usually used to improve cognitive function in people with Parkinson's. It's theoretically attractive because freezing is probably related not just to dysfunction of the dopamine system in the brain, but probably also the cholinergic system in the brain. That's why they're conceptually interesting. The second reason they're interesting is that we think there's a close interaction between cognition and motor control in causing freezing of gait. So the cholinesterase inhibitor, if it improves your cognitive functioning, it may paradoxically improve motor functioning as well because of the interaction between the two. So the studies have been positive and encouraging, but my concern is that this is not sort of born out of real life data. If cholinesterase inhibitors had been a miracle drug for freezing, we should have seen it in clinical practice. I use cholinesterase inhibitors a lot in my patients to improve cognition, but I rarely see patients coming back and say, well, hecky darn, doctor, I can walk again. So I'm not convinced that this is a miracle drug. Droxidopa is a different compound. It works on the aprenergic noradrenergic system. The best indication to my mind is orthostatic hypotension, the fainting because of the dropping blood pressure. There are small studies from Japan that suggested that droxidopa could reduce freezing, but the only positive findings have been in Japanese patients. It's not been replicated outside of Japan, and I'm not convinced that this is a miracle drug for freezing either.
Yes, absolutely right. I'm going to read a couple of questions from some patients. Reggie and David Campbell want to know, is there research on pesticides being a DNA trigger?
A DNA trigger? No, so I'm not a toxicologist. For those people who asked the question, I'm a simple neurologist. But what I know is that most of these pesticides interact somehow with the mitochondrial system. The mitochondria are the respiratory organs of the brain cells, and they are inhibited by many different pesticides. Rotenone, that Shilpa mentioned, paraquat, are both powerful inhibitors of the respiratory system of the nerve cells. And that's how they get killed. And from what I understand and read is that many of these pesticides somehow interact with that system. The pesticides, to the best of my knowledge, don't cause changes in the DNA, although many of these pesticides are related to cancer as well, which suggests an effect on your genetic materials. What is interesting is that there are a number of genes that we know can cause Parkinson's, and these genes interact with the pesticides. So that's how they're related to each other.
Thank you. And Gretchen wants to know, how can I, a person with Parkinson's, best work with neurologists for effectiveness and a good relationship?
Well, you know, it's a crucial question, and it's also a difficult one. You know, usually when the neurologist is allocated to you, you know, that's a random process, isn't it? Your GP or somebody refers you, and it's a stroke of luck whether you find somebody who is genuine, interested, friendly, committed, reads the literature. So if you happen to find, you know, the sheep with the five legs, you know, you're lucky. But I know that you can be unfortunate as well. And the best way to build up a relationship with me is, you know, to tell something about yourself. So you want to be more than a patient. Position yourself as a person who happens to have Parkinson's disease instead of a patient with Parkinson's disease. I like to speak to people as human beings. I'm genuinely interested in their life. I hope my colleagues will think the same. Mm-hmm. Second, I don't fear educated patients. I love them. I know some of my colleagues love to play God and be superior, but I think come to your doctor's office well prepared. And if there's one thing I'd like to give you is think carefully at home with your spouse, with your children, with your friends. What is the number one topic I want to address with my physician, with my neurologist? Sometimes Parkinson's can be so difficult and complex that there may be 100 things you want to ask. But there you are in your 10-minute slot with the doctor and your 100 problems. And you know what? You empty the bucket and the doctor feels overwhelmed. Nothing happens, nothing. If you think carefully about your number one problem, but you insist that he or she takes action on that number one problem, hopefully it will be solved. And the next time you come with your issue number two and fix it. So prepare yourself and come with a short list of questions which you want to be cleared most urgently. That helps to build up the relationship with your doctor. And finally, you know, if you're refurbishing your house and your plumber is an asshole, you'll find yourself a new plumber, right? Now, if your neurologist doesn't suit your likings, why don't you change from you know, and people think, oh, if only I don't insult him. And we're not gods. we're here to help you. That's our mission in life. We should be thankful that we are allowed to help you. And if you're not happy with me, you'll sack me. Okay, I'll leave it there.
That's a very nice response. A couple of questions here. This is just a comment from Peter. I'm convinced agriculture started me down this road of PD. Eli Lilly was the company I sold for. Thanks for sharing that, Peter.
Yeah.
And then James Armington wants to know, can treating anxiety reduce freezing of gait? It seems to be worse when anxiety is worse.
Yes, James, this is an excellent question. It's actually a research topic at my center. What we see is that anxiety is a powerful trigger for freezing of gait. So anything that can alleviate anxiety, we think is a treatment for freezing of gait. And we know, for example, that when people freeze, their heart rate goes up. But what is really cool type of research, if I may use that word, is that the heart rate already goes up prior to the freeze. So probably something startled people, raises their anxiety levels, and then they freeze. And then the freezing itself is an anxious moment, causes further anxiety. So now you're in a vicious loop where you're stuck and frozen, keen to move on. People are looking at you, anxiety goes up, freezing gets worse. So reducing your overall anxiety levels may help to prevent them from happening. If you have a bout of freezing, learning through mindfulness, for example, how to reduce your anxiety level, let the freeze overcome you, accept the freeze instead of trying to fight it actively. And you will probably find that you'll be on your feet and on your way sooner than when you remain anxious and try to fight it. I hope that helps you. And sometimes if you're constantly anxious, then anxiolytics can help, and they probably help to reduce freezing of gait.
Yeah, absolutely. Rytary has been so expensive. Should we expect all Parkinson's medications in the future to be as expensive?
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, this is a thorn in my eye. If that's an American expression, I don't know. The problem is all these drugs have a long pipeline. So the bench to bedside pipeline is long and expensive. So on the one hand, I do understand to some extent, you know, the chimney needs to smoke, as we say in Dutch. So the pharma companies need to, you know, make an earning themselves, and I accept that. But I think a lot of the prices are outrageous. Just to give you a little sidekick, levodopa costs next to nothing, and these buggers sell it at a high price in Africa. Most people in Africa cannot afford levodopa, even though it costs next to nothing. And I think that's outrageous. They should be bloody ashamed. So yes, it is likely that new drugs will be expensive. Part of that cost is justified, but I think making money out of your misery is bad. Bad.
True, how true, very true. So is there research on PD, non-motor, cognitive decline, and immune therapy, antibody therapy?
Cognitive decline and immune therapy. Are those two questions, or is it related into one question?
One question.
Yeah. So there's a lot of research being done on cognitive decline, which is partially related to lack of dopamine. So increasing your dopaminergic medication can improve some of the cognitive functions, although the reality is that motor functions respond better than the cognitive functions. What is really strange and interesting about the cognitive functions is it has a U-shaped curve. So if you dose the levodopa higher and higher, your cognitive functions may get worse again. So they're worse without levodopa, get better with a low dose, and in a high dose, they may get worse. So that's interesting about the dopaminergic component. In the later phases of the disease, when the cortex becomes involved, then the other neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, becomes involved, and that's when the cholinesterase inhibitor becomes useful. Immune therapy is an experimental treatment. We think that we may be able to slow down the progression of Parkinson's by tackling the underlying degenerative process, in particular the accumulation of alpha-synuclein. One of the approaches to do this is to send little rockets, little missiles, to bombard the alpha-synuclein. These are called antibodies. That's the immune therapy, but that's not specifically for cognition. What I can say is that those immune therapies are experimental. I'm hopeful they will work, but we've seen in the Alzheimer field that there will also be many disappointments, no doubt. And if they work, they will typically be applied to patients in an early stage of the disease, which will then hopefully prevent the cognitive decline from happening in the future. But again, this is all experimental at this stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have one last question, Dr. Bloem. What can you tell us about wearable sensors and the role that they play in patients with Parkinson's?
Yes, I'm a believer. My research group is very active. I have a whole team working on wearable sensors. You know, the problem with Parkinson's is when you go to the clinic, the doctor will get an extremely biased view of how you function. The tremor is typically worse because of the anxiety and the stress, but the freezing of gait is typically gone because the same anxiety of knowing that you're being observed is mysteriously enough helps to suppress the freezing, much to everybody's frustration. So I know patients who freeze all the time at home. They come to my clinic and they walk like never before. And the spouse says, "Come on, John, freeze, show it to the doctor." And outside on the parking lot, they freeze again. So in other words, hospital visits are not good for Parkinson patients. You have to drive long distances only to get 10 minutes with your doctor to have a biased perspective. So observing you in your own home, in your own habitat, in your own natural environment is critical. And I think Parkinson's is a measurable disease. Tremor, gait, bradykinesia. We're in the phase now where we need to look at compliance, which device on which body part, build algorithms that work not only in the lab, but also work in your own home environment, where your movements are less predictable, things are messy. So we are not there yet, but I think during my career, there will be a time where you're wearing a sensor, or maybe the sensors are built into your home, which then seamlessly go into a dashboard. You come to my clinic, or I speak to you on the phone or through a video. I do a readout of your recordings and then say, "Oh, this and this needs to be done." That's my dream scenario. I think it's realistic, but it takes at least 5 and more likely 10 years before this is going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, just to add on to what you said, is, you know, the patient comes to clinic and the spouse will say, "Oh, he's just showing off for you, Dr. Chitnis."
Yes,
but
exactly.
At home, they're so different. So Gretchen wants to know, does the MIND diet have any relevance?
The what?
The MIND, M-I-N-D, MIND diet has any relevance?
Oh, I don't know the MIND diet. Oh, that's Mediterranean diet?
It's very similar to the Mediterranean diet.
I think it's, yeah. So, yeah, like I said, so there's a number of studies. Now I remember, I've seen that paper. The Mediterranean diet is associated with a lower risk of future development of Parkinson's. So healthy folks who adhere to a Mediterranean diet are protected against Parkinson's, at least partially. Whether that same diet is good for you when you have the disease, we don't know, but I do recommend it to all my patients.
Yep, absolutely. And then last question, maybe more dopamine causes more rigidity, it seems?
Well, that would be unlikely. That would be a paradoxical response. So levodopa, which is converted into dopamine, has the greatest efficacy on the slowness and the rigidity in most patients. Tremor seems to respond less. Cognition seems to respond less. And for example, dysarthria, the speaking problems and the swallowing problems and the falls usually don't respond at all to the dopaminergic medication. A worsening of rigidity with dopamine is an unexpected reaction. Sometimes what happens is when people have very slow bowel movements, they take the pill and the pill takes 100 years to reach the blood Meanwhile, your Parkinson's worsens. So you think the pill made my Parkinson's worse. But what actually happened is the pill never arrived in the right place and your disease just deteriorated over time. Does it make sense? So it's called a delayed on. And very often this is a gastric issue or a constipation issue. And I keep emphasizing, treat the gut, treat the gut. Make sure you have regular bowel movements.
Yes, absolutely. Anybody else has any other questions? We are almost at the end of the hour with 12:59, but this has been really a very excellent discussion, and we'll call you back again, Dr. Bloem, and tap your brain more in future sessions. Shelley, any last words? Thank you from my end.
Yes, I completely echo all of Shilpa's sentiments. Dr. Bloem, thank you so much. This was an excellent conversation. A lot of great discussion as well in the chat box. So thank you everyone for engaging with us. Just a quick announcement before I let you guys go for today. Next month, November, is National Caregiver Month. So in lieu of our regular Ask the Doctor webinar, we are actually going to be doing an Ask the Caregiver session. It's going to be a webinar like this just on Zoom. And we'll have a panel of caregivers share their experiences with us and answer your questions. Registration for that is not open yet, but if this is something that you're interested in, please send me an email at info@skypassfoundation.org, and I'll be happy to share that information with you as soon as registration is open. It'll be ready sometime next week. Again, info@skypassfoundation.org. Shilpa?
So
Can I just say one thing? I just
Yes.
typed it in the, I recommend that people buy the book, Ending Parkinson's Disease. I'm not promoting my income here. All proceeds go directly to patient associations and to the greater good of solving the Parkinson mystery. It's an important book, and it's a call to action. It says what you can do to become an activist. So
Absolutely.
by reading the book, you'll be more knowledgeable and you support the greater good. So you can find it on Amazon.com or anywhere else, and you support the greater good.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing
One
that.
last question from Peter Belinas. What position did you play on the
Peter, this is the best question ever. So I played on the Dutch national team, and I had the service reception and as the winger, the attacker. And I played in the national volleyball, and I was really good. I was one of the best in the country for the service reception, but we had excellent spikers, so I received relatively few sets. But now my son, my oldest son, Jochem, is also playing in the national Premier League as a mid-blocker. And he jumps about 3 times as high as I used to do in my days. So he's a way better talent than I am. And it gives me so much great fun, to see my son excel now. And I have to say, that's a great passion in my life.
Wonderful.
So thank you for asking.
Yeah.
Are you a volleyball player, Peter, yourself?
No.
Volleyball players tend to be nice people. And you know why? Because volleyball is a team of unique individuals who have to collaborate. So it's a metaphor for Parkinson-net. You have a setter. You now have a small guy in a different shirt for the defense. Then you have the mid-blockers, who are typically the bass players in the band. They're quiet in the background. And then you've got the wingers and the diagonal. And they can all do different things. And the chemistry is if you add it all up, there's no single star in the team. We have to work together. That's a beautiful closing remark.
Team, absolutely.
Well, hope to see you again sometime. I'm always happy to help. So bye-bye, stay safe, and be good. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone.